The night Leonia Carrington vanished, Cuyahoga Falls lay under a restless sky. One of those late autumn nights when the wind scraped against the wooden siding of every house like it carried unfinished business. Inside the Carrington mansion, however, the air felt unnaturally still, as though the walls themselves were listening. The gas lamps flickered in narrow corridors lined with polished walnut panels, casting thin, jittering shadows across the carpets their servants spent hours beating clean. Yet no amount of order could disguise the tension that poured from room to room as the family awakened to the terrifying realization. Leonia was gone. Her mother, Eleanor, stood at the threshold of her daughter's bedroom, clutching a lace shawl around her shoulders with shaking hands. She looked shrunken, smaller than usual, as if the night itself had consumed part of her. Behind her, Samuel Carrington maintained the rigid, commanding posture expected of a man who built an empire on timber and coal. His presence usually silenced entire rooms. Tonight, however, whispers filled the space, servants murmuring prayers, a deputy speaking low to another, boots shuffling across the heart pine floor. The room was painfully neat. That was the first thing the sheriff noticed. Leonia's quilt was pulled back only slightly, as though she had risen quietly rather than been taken. Her boots remained at the foot of the bed, one tipped on its side. The kerosene lamp on her nightstand had burned halfway before extinguishing itself. Nothing was overturned, no curtains torn, no sign of a struggle. It was a disappearance without violence, almost polite in its execution. Did she often rise during the night? Sheriff Donnelly asked, his voice steady but wary. Samuel answered before his wife could speak. No, Leonia suffered from spells of faintness. She would not have gone anywhere alone. His tone held a warning. Contradict me, and you contradict this family. But Eleanor's eyes drifted toward the writing desk in the corner, toward something only she seemed to notice before she forced her gaze back to the sheriff. She rarely slept well, she said softly, but she wouldn't leave the house. The maid Ruth stood rigid near the armoire, her face drained of color. Sir, she whispered to the sheriff when Samuel stepped away. Miss Leonia seemed troubled these past weeks. Not ill, just troubled. Her eyes flicked toward the parents, then back. She kept her window locked even during warm nights. A strange detail. Sheriff Donnelly approached the window, tested the latch, and found it secure from the inside. The glass showed no fingerprints beyond Leonia's usual faint smudges. Outside, he could see the storm-bent trees swaying violently under the moonlight. If she had left through that window, the wind would have carried the curtains across the room, but nothing was disturbed. No tracks in the soft earth below, no ladder marks, no footprints. A disappearance without entry or exit. He moved next to the writing desk. A thin sheet of paper lay beneath an inkwell. Blank. But the fibers were slightly warped, as if someone had written on it recently and then destroyed the message. The sheriff brushed a thumb across the surface, still faintly warm. When he turned to ask the parents about it, Samuel Carrington was already watching him with an unreadable expression. We expect discretion, Sheriff. My daughter's reputation must remain intact during this investigation. As must her safety, the sheriff replied coolly. Silence tightened the room. Ruth, unable to contain her dread, stepped closer to Eleanor. Ma'am, may I speak plainly? Eleanor gave a trembling nod. The hallway wall, Ruth whispered, barely audible. The one behind Miss Leonia's bed. I heard noises these past 3 nights, soft ones like tapping. I thought it was mice, but she faltered under Samuel's glare. We are not here to indulge superstition, he snapped. Yet the sheriff noted something then. A thin, almost invisible hairline crack running down a section of wallpaper near the bed. The kind that appeared after wood shifted or something behind it moved. He approached it slowly, raising his lantern. The faint heat of the flame cast an elongated glow over the crack. Eleanor gasped quietly. Samuel's jaw tightened. Has this wall been altered recently? The sheriff asked. No, Samuel said sharply. This house was built to last. But the sheriff pressed a finger to the wallpaper. The plaster beneath felt uneven, almost hollow. He leaned closer. There, an indentation, small but deliberate. as if a fingertip had once pressed desperately from the other side. The lantern flame trembled, though no draft blew. The sheriff straightened slowly, the weight of the room shifting around him. Something was wrong with this wall. Deeply wrong. And whatever secret it held, whatever truth it concealed, felt painfully close to the surface, waiting for the slightest touch to break free. Like something had wanted out. Or someone. By morning, the Carrington mansion had become a place of measured footsteps and stifled breaths. The servants moved like shadows, their usual routines warped by fear. Word of Leonia's disappearance had already slipped beyond the estate walls, carried by milkmen, chimney sweepers, and the frigid Ohio air. In a town where everyone's business was an open ledger, the sudden silence surrounding the Carringtons only intensified speculation. Sheriff Donnelly returned shortly after dawn, accompanied by Deputy Marks, young, earnest, and already visibly uneasy about the case. Their boots echoed through the marble-floored entry hall as Samuel Carrington descended the staircase with the bearing of a man accustomed to negotiating contracts, not catastrophes. "You'll conduct your inquiries from the servants' wing today," Samuel declared, not bothering with greetings. "Their accounts will be more useful." It was a command disguised as cooperation, but Donnelly had spent too many years dealing with powerful men to be intimidated by polished hardwood and portraits of stern ancestors. "We'll speak to the staff," he agreed, "but we'll also need access to your private records, all of them." Samuel paused mid-step. "Our finances have nothing to do with—" "Your daughter vanished inside a locked room," Donnelly interrupted softly. "Until we understand the full extent of your household circumstances, everything is relevant." Eleanor appeared at the top of the staircase then, wrapped in a dark mourning robe. She looked fragile in the milky light, as if grief had drained her from within. "Let him have what he needs, Samuel," she whispered. Samuel said nothing, but his jaw flexed. He resumed his descent without granting either of them a direct answer. Donnelly and Marks were led into the servants' quarters, narrower corridors with lower ceilings, where the wallpaper yellowed from stove heat and the scent of soap clung to every surface. The staff assembled stiffly around the long wooden table. Ruth the maid, Thomas the footman, Mrs. Kettering the cook, and Jonas, the quiet, broad-shouldered stable hand, whose loyalty to the Carringtons was well known. Donnelly began with Ruth. "You said Miss Leonia seemed troubled, how so?" Ruth wrung her hands until her knuckles blanched. "She was listening a lot, leaning close to that wall as though trying to hear someone speaking through it." "Did she ever say what she heard?" Ruth shook her head. "Only that the house didn't feel right anymore." Thomas, normally stoic, shifted anxiously. "Pardon me, sir, but she wasn't the only one hearing things. I've done rounds here for years. The boards creak in winter, sure, but this was different. More like movement. Movement behind a wall." Donnelly felt the detail tighten around him like a drawn cord. Mrs. Kettering spoke next, her voice gravelly from years spent near hot ovens. "Miss Leonia barely touched her meals lately. She looked as if something weighed on her. Not illness. Something else." "What about letters?" Donnelly asked. "Visitors? Anything unusual?" Jonas, who had been silent until then, lifted his gaze. "There was a man," he said slowly. "Came asking for Mr. Carrington 2 weeks ago. Said his name was Fletcher. Wore city clothes. Didn't seem the type to come all the way out here unless he had business that couldn't be written down." Jonas's brow furrowed. "Mr. Carrington refused to see him. Sent me to tell him never to return." "Did Miss Leonia know of this visitor?" Marks asked. "I can't say," Jonas replied, "but she was standing at her window the whole time, watching." The idea of Leonia quietly observing, a stranger turned away, tempers rising at the front gate, sent a ripple of unease through the room. Donnelly scribbled notes, then asked the question he had been circling all morning. "Has that bedroom wall ever been opened? Repaired? Altered?" All eyes turned to Thomas, who swallowed hard. "Not in my years here, sir. But there's been talk among older staff. Before most of us arrived, the master had modifications made. In secret. The builders were brought in at night. The implication lingered like smoke." "What kind of modifications?" Donnelly pressed. No one answered. Or perhaps no one dared. Deputy Marks shifted, his face pale. "Sheriff, the carpenter outside wants a word." The two men stepped into the hall, where the carpenter, summoned earlier to assess the structure, waited with an expression that made Donnelly's stomach tighten. "That wall," the carpenter said quietly, "isn't original to the house. The beams behind it don't match the foundation's pattern." He glanced toward the bedroom above, unease sharpening his voice. "Someone added that section intentionally, not for support, for concealment." Donnelly felt the weight of the conclusion settle heavily, a hidden space built deliberately directly behind the room where Leonia slept. As the carpenter turned the lantern upward toward the staircase, its flame flickered in an odd, tremulous pattern, as though disturbed by a draft from a place no draft should reach. And for a fleeting moment, Donnelly could swear he heard it again. A faint, rhythmic sound. Soft, measured, like tapping from somewhere inside the walls. The third day after Leonia's disappearance brought a strange, oppressive calm. Snow clouds pressed low over Cuyahoga Falls, muting the town's usual industrial noise. The chimneys of the factories along the river exhaled slow, tired plumes, as though even the machines sensed something was wrong within the mansion overlooking them. Inside the Carrington estate, Sheriff Donnelly found the atmosphere even heavier than before. It wasn't fear alone. Fear was loud, frantic, visible. This was something quieter, deeper, like guilt steeped into the wallpaper. He had returned to inspect the wall again, this time with proper tools. The bedroom was cold, the windows frosted lightly around the edges. The bed remained untouched since the morning of Leonia's disappearance, as if preserving the last moment she'd inhabited the room. Deputy Marks kneeled beside a lantern placed near the suspect section of wall. "Feel here," he murmured, gesturing to a thin line in the wallpaper. Donnelly pressed his palm to the spot. The plaster cooled his skin at first, then seemed to warm subtly beneath his touch, like the faint residual heat of a recently vacated space. "A hollow," Donnelly confirmed. Marks nodded. "The carpenter believes the wall was built nearly 15 years ago. That would have been when the Carrington fortune first boomed. They had the means to hide, well, anything." Donnelly exhaled slowly. Secrets always festered in wealth, and in families who guarded their reputations like brittle crystal, they festered deeper. He examined the desk again. The blank sheet of paper lay precisely where he'd found it, but he now noticed faint grooves, indentations left by a writer's pressure. Something had been written here recently, something someone did not want read. He lifted the paper to the light. Marks leaned closer. "Can you make out anything?" "No, but someone who presses hard when they write leaves traces on the wood." Donnelly ran a finger along the desktop's surface. "We'll need a rubbing kit. I want whatever she wrote uncovered." Before they could take further steps, a cry rang from the hallway. Ruth's voice, strained and urgent. Donnelly and Marks hurried out, finding the maid trembling near the staircase railing. "I saw her," Ruth gasped. "I swear it. I saw Miss Leonia." Donnelly put steadying hands on her shoulders. "Where?" Ruth pointed toward the end of the corridor, the darker, narrower corridor leading to the unused east wing. "She was standing there, just for a moment. She looked pale. And then she stepped back into the dark." Marks exchanged a doubtful glance with the sheriff, but Donnelly did not dismiss her claim. Fear twisted perceptions, yes, but so did truths people were not yet ready to face. "Show us," he said gently. Ruth led them down the east hallway. Dust muffled their steps. Portraits hung crooked where drafts had warped the frames. No lamps burned here. This wing had been out of use for years. Ruth stopped halfway, pointing at a patch of floorboards. She was there. Donnelly crouched. The dust was disturbed, just barely, shifting in a way that suggested recent movement. But no footprints, no marks, nothing that proved a person had stood there. Still, the unease thickened. Deputy Marks scanned the dim corridor. Why would she come here? Ruth swallowed. Miss Leonia hated this wing, said it felt wrong, like someone watched her from the walls. The walls again. Donnelly rose slowly, his mind assembling fragments, noises behind plaster, a stranger named Fletcher, a hidden addition to the house, a troubled young woman observing arguments from behind her window. Something was converging. They returned to the main hall, where Samuel Carrington waited, his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. "You are frightening my staff," he said coldly. "They're already frightened," Donnelly replied. "You might consider asking yourself why." Samuel's eyes hardened. "You forget your place, Sheriff." "And you forget," Donnelly answered with equal frost, "that I'm the only man in this county who gives a damn about finding your daughter alive." Tension crackled like static between them. Eleanor entered then, quiet as snowfall. Her eyes moved from Donnelly to Samuel with haunted deliberation. "There is something you should see," she whispered, though her voice carried a weight that made both men straighten. She held out an object wrapped in a handkerchief. Donnelly unfolded the cloth to reveal a small silver locket, oval, engraved with delicate vines, Leonia's. But he had seen her wear it days before her disappearance. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Eleanor lowered her gaze. Inside the baseboard drawer of her room. It was wedged deep, as though she hid it hurriedly. Donnelly clicked it open. Inside was a miniature portrait, sepia-toned, faded, of a young man with solemn eyes. "Who is he?" Marks asked. Eleanor hesitated. Samuel's voice answered instead, sharp as a blade. "Someone who has no place in this investigation." But the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. As Donnelly studied the portrait, a strange sensation washed over him. Something about the man's eyes, the tension in his posture, the faint resemblance to someone he'd seen recently, though he couldn't yet place it. And then he felt it again. A whisper of movement. A shift of air. A nearly imperceptible tap. Somewhere behind the bedroom wall they had just left. As though something behind it had just reacted. Snow began falling that evening. Thick, slow flakes that muffled the sounds of the town and cloaked the Carrington mansion in a deceptive calm. Inside, however, tension tightened every hallway, every breath. The atmosphere felt strained, as if the house itself were holding something back. Sheriff Donnelly stood once again in Leonia's bedroom, lantern in hand. Deputy Marks had just returned from town with the materials needed for examining the writing impressions on Leonia's desk. But before they could begin, the carpenter approached with a grave expression. "I've tested the adjacent beams," he said quietly. "The space behind this wall extends deeper than expected, nearly 4 feet. Donnelly felt the air shift. 4 feet? That's no simple crawl space, the carpenter murmured. It's a chamber built directly behind the room of a young woman who'd vanished without struggle. Marks exhaled shakily. Why would anyone build a hidden room in a private home? Donnelly didn't answer. His mind was already moving through possibilities, none of them benign. He knelt again by the crack in the wallpaper. "This section needs to come down," he said. "Tonight." The carpenter hesitated. "Mr. Carrington is not in charge of this investigation," Donnelly said firmly. "Proceed." But before tools touched plaster, footsteps echoed from the hallway, light, swift, urgent. Eleanor Carrington appeared, her face ashen, hands trembling as though she had run. Behind her, Samuel followed with thunderous disapproval. "You will not destroy that wall," Samuel barked. Eleanor stepped between him and the sheriff, surprising them both. "Samuel, they must." Her voice broke on the last word. Donnelly saw something like terror flicker behind her eyes. Samuel lowered his voice, but the threat sharpened it. "If you allow this madness, Eleanor, you will disgrace this family." She swallowed hard. "And if I don't," she whispered, "I may lose my daughter forever." The words stabbed the silence. Samuel stared at her, stunned, then furious. For the first time, Donnelly saw fear in the man's expression. Not concern for Leonia. Fear of what might be found. With a reluctant nod from Eleanor, Donnelly motioned the carpenter forward. Tools struck plaster, echoing through the house like blows to a coffin lid. Bits of dust drifted in the lantern light. A fissure widened. And then, a hollow thud. The carpenter froze. "Sheriff, the inner structure isn't solid. There's wood paneling behind it. Keep going, Donnelly ordered. Eleanor clutched her shawl, her breath quickening with each strike. Samuel paced like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. When the last layer of plaster broke free, the lantern revealed what lay beneath. Smooth wooden boards, aged and varnished long ago, fitted too precisely to be accidental. There was a seam running vertically, thin but unmistakable. A door, Marks whispered. A secret door behind a young woman's bed. Donnelly pressed his fingers along the seam, searching for a latch. None. He tried a knife. The wood resisted. The carpenter stepped forward, testing the grain with practiced fingertips. There's a pressure catch, he murmured. Hidden, likely designed to open only from the inside. A chill prickled Donnelly's skin. From the inside. He turned to Samuel. Who built this? Samuel's lips tightened. I owe you no explanation. Eleanor's voice rose, desperate. Samuel, please, tell them. But he remained stone. Donnelly faced the carpenter. Open it. A wedge tool slipped into the seam. A groan of wood and shifting air filled the room, followed by a faint release, like the unsealing of a long-closed tomb. The door cracked open half an inch. Cold, stale air drifted out. Eleanor stepped back with a stifled cry, covering her mouth. Marks raised his lantern, illuminating the narrow darkness beyond. The light revealed a small chamber, the walls bare, the floor covered in old sawdust, and along the far wall, indentations, tiny patterns of scratches, like the marks of restless fingers. But something else caught Donnelly's eye. Near the corner of the chamber lay a scrap of fabric. He reached for it, pulling it into the light. A fragment of pale blue cotton, recognizable at once. It was the same fabric as the dress Leonia had worn the evening before she vanished. Eleanor collapsed against the doorway, her sob caught in her throat. Samuel closed his eyes with a shudder, as if the house had betrayed him. Donnelly's lantern wavered slightly, the flame bending toward the opening, as though drawn inward by a subtle draft originating deeper than the chamber's visible boundaries. For though the space was narrow and seemingly contained, Donnelly sensed it immediately. There was more. Another void behind this one, a darkness not yet revealed, and something about that darkness felt terribly, disturbingly alive. The narrow chamber behind Leonia's wall felt like a wound carved into the house, an intrusion that had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. Sheriff Donnelly stepped inside cautiously, his lantern throwing trembling light across the cramped space. Dust clung to everything, rising in faint clouds as the floorboards creaked under his weight. Deputy Marks lingered at the threshold. Sheriff, the air feels wrong. It did, heavy, stale, and beneath it all something else, an undertone of human presence, faint but unmistakable. A life lived in shadows. Donnelly pressed deeper. The chamber was only 6 feet across, lined with bare wooden slats. But along the back wall, beneath the scratches, he noticed a subtle irregularity. A second seam, thinner than the first, more carefully hidden. Another passage. His pulse quickened. Get the tools, he murmured. Before Marks could move, Samuel Carrington lunged forward. You will not open that, he thundered. This has gone far enough. Eleanor stepped between them, her posture trembling yet resolute. Samuel, if that door hides the truth, you cannot stop it. Her husband's face twisted into something fierce, almost desperate. You don't understand. Then make me, she whispered. But Samuel said nothing. He simply backed away, his shoulders sinking as if a burden too heavy to bear had finally cracked him. The carpenter retrieved the tools. With a few careful taps, the second seam gave way. The panel opened with a long, shuddering sigh, as though releasing air trapped for years. Behind it lay a far narrower tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. The darkness seemed to absorb the lantern light rather than reflect it. Donnelly inhaled slowly. Marks, with me. Eleanor reached out, grasping his sleeve. Please, if she's in there, we'll bring her out, he promised, though even as he said it, doubt coiled inside him. They entered the passage. The air cooled sharply. The walls grew closer, scraping their shoulders. The tunnel sloped downward, then curved, revealing a second chamber, larger but no less unnerving. This one was furnished. A cot pushed against the wall, a water basin, a stack of old books with worn leather spines, and on the far side, a small wooden stool. Mark swallowed hard. Someone lived here. But Donnelly's gaze fixed on something more startling. A set of faint footprints disturbed the dust. Small, bare, fresh, Leonia's. She was here, Donnelly murmured. Recently. He moved toward the books, running fingers along their spines. Emerson, Hawthorne, a medical manual, a farmer's almanac. But beneath them lay a folded sheet of paper. He opened it. A message written in Leonia's handwriting. Swift, uneven, urgent. I heard him again last night. The tapping has changed. It's closer. I know now this room was never meant for me. I think he's still here. Donnelly felt his blood run cold. Who is he? Marks whispered. Before Donnelly could answer, a sound drifted through the passage behind them. A soft, rhythmic tap. Not from the chamber they had just exited, from deeper in the shadows. Eleanor cried out behind them, but Samuel's voice cut sharper. Donnelly, get out of there! The sheriff ignored him. He raised his lantern and stepped toward the back wall of the second chamber. And there it was, another seam, a third hidden door. This one older, marked by scrapes, indentations, and the unmistakable imprint of nails clawing from within. Human nails. Mark stumbled back. Dear God! Donnelly steadied himself. Help me open it. But before they touched it, footsteps pounded down the passage, the hurried, uneven steps of someone in panic. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, tears streaking her face. I know who lived behind that wall, she choked. Samuel's brother. Donnelly froze. Eleanor's voice trembled. He was ill, violent. They kept him hidden. For years. They said it was for his own safety, and ours. But when the sickness deepened, Samuel sealed him away. He swore he had died. But I never saw a body. Mark stared in horror at the claw marks. Donnelly pressed his hand to the third door. The tapping stopped. Silence swelled, pressing like weight against their ears. Then, a single deliberate tap. Slow, measured, as though answering them. Eleanor's breath hitched. That's not possible. Donnelly lowered the lantern closer. The tapping came again. But this time, it came from two places at once. From behind the third door, and from the tunnel behind them. Donnelly spun, lantern raised, just as a shadow slipped past the edge of the passage, silent as breath, vanishing before the light touched it. Mark stumbled backward. Sheriff! Was that? Donnelly didn't answer. Because he already knew, whatever had lived behind these walls, it was no longer inside them. If this story left you breathless, don't leave just yet. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more hidden American histories, hit the like button, and make sure to share this video with someone who loves a chilling mystery. Your support helps uncover the next dark secret.